Welcome, everyone. We'll just give it a couple minutes here as we settle in and get our presenters all settled. One question I see, if there's anyone in the waiting room, attendee room, that needs to be present or to speak for the first session, please go ahead and raise your hand.
John, it's Chris from SCB. Can you hear me okay?
I can, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Chris, I see Matthew Strange from Confluence is on. Would you like him to join as a panelist?
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you. It'll be Michael, Esger, myself, and Matt presenting.
Great.
How are you, John?
Doing well, Michael. How are you?
All right.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Anyone else that you all see from the design team that needs to be, or do you have your team present and accounted for here?
I believe that we do. Joe McMillan from the development team might be.
You not on yet?
Okay.
And if not, that's okay. We can proceed.
All right, so are we good to begin?
I think we are, Josh. Thank you.
Okay, great. So good afternoon. I'm Josh Sun, along with John Law, and we're with the Department of Planning and Development. Welcome to the October 12th, 2022 meeting of the Committee on Design. Please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to DPD's YouTube page. To our esteemed committee, thank you for volunteering your time to be a part of this advisory group. To the members of the public who are joining us, what you will see today and at future Committee on Design meetings are projects currently under review by DPD staff. The committee is a voluntary advisory body of design professionals that provide their expertise on design issues. This committee is not a substitute for Plan Commission, as it is not a forum for public debate, nor is the advice of the committee legally binding. It is the hope that today's discourse will lead to recommendations that will elevate the design excellence of the city of Chicago. These recommendations will be forwarded to DPD staff for consideration as they review these projects for Plan Commission and subsequent approvals. I will now continue on to the roll call. Please state present or here if you are in attendance. So Andre Brumfeld.
Here.
Philip Enquist.
Here.
Eleanor Gorski. Casey Jones.
Here.
Jackie Koo.
Here, but I'm going to be recused.
Thank you. Juan Moreno.
Here.
Maria Villalobos.
Here.
Leon Walker. All right, before we get to the agenda, to members of the public, you are welcome to begin submitting comments and questions through the Q&A box. Committee members are invited to review this information during and after each presentation and incorporate the comments into the discussion. We will not be reviewing questions or comments from the public individually, but we'll be recording them for use when reviewing the project. We will now move on to the first item on the agenda. The applicant team, if you're ready, you can go ahead and pull it up.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So Chris, you'll pull it up. Hello, everyone. And
Yes, I would
hold on,
like to
we'll
pull it up.
Just pull it up and then I'm just going to go over the summary of it really quickly. Michael.
got it.
Yeah, it says host disabled participant screen sharing for Chris. If you could allow me to
Kamal.
share.
Okay, yeah.
Try that again now if you might see it now.
Okay, yeah, I'm seeing it now.
You got it, Chris?
I
Great.
think so. Yeah, is
Okay.
that working?
Yes. One second.
Terrific.
So up for review is 1234 West Randolph, a proposed 470-foot tall, 42-story residential building comprising 400 residential units, 124 automobile parking spaces, and 200 bicycle parking spaces. The proposal will provide 2,800 square feet of public open space along with amenity space at the 6th and 34th floor. The project will be adjacent to City Winery. The podium will consist of terracotta and metal panel, while the rest of the structure will be constructed with glass, dark gray aluminum, and brick red terracotta. To any committee members who are associated with this project, if you have not yet, please recuse yourself at this time and for the duration of the review of this project. To the applicant team, please clearly state your name and your relation to the project prior to speaking. You will have about 20 minutes to present your proposal. Committee members, please hold your comments and questions until after each presentation. Please proceed with the presentation and state your name prior to speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. My name is Michael Esger from the law firm of Acosta Esger, and we are zoning counsel for the project located at 1200 to 34 West Randolph Street. That includes, as you mentioned, Josh, the City Winery project as sub-area B and a property that is currently a dairy manufacturing facility to be redeveloped as sub-area A of this planned development. This planned development was previously approved for a hotel, 259 key hotel project, and it is now proposed to convert to a residential building with a mixed-use residential building in this transit-oriented location under and compliance with the new equitable transit-oriented development ordinance, with the team of Azure Capital Management and Joe McMillan, as well as Golub and Company, and Lee Golub is here as well. I'll turn it over to Chris Pemberton at SCB to lead the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Michael. I'm Chris Pemberton. I'm a principal and president of SCB Architects here in Chicago. And I'm going to be joined by Matt Strange from Confluence. So we're going to go through and present both the architecture and some of the site and landscape portions of the project. So if I just get going, I think Michael talked about the two sub areas A and B, which you see on the site plan here. The address is along Randolph Street. I think B is where the City Winery is for folks that know that, and Racine is just running north-south here to give you some location. If we look at that in a little bit more detail, you can see Racine that is here. Notably as well, our site, and it's really the square box that you see on the left-hand side here that we're going to be talking about, the City Winery remains as it is today. There's an axis going up North Willard Court you can see here. And if this photo in the blue frame here sort of shows you where our site sits in relation to Willard Court here. And then a couple of views of the site context looking along West Randolph Street. You're going to see the building put in context, but I thought it would be helpful to the committee just to see, some of the basis of design. We've had a lot of review with DPD and many stakeholders as we've gone along. But the genesis of the design is that if you sort of look at the top left here where my mouse is, you can see there's the City Winery here.
Hey, Chris, sorry, this is Josh. Are you able to maximize your screen?
I can, and I can zoom in. I kept it like this. Maybe is that better if I zoom in?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. We have some audience members that are requesting this.
Sure
So
thing.
thank you.
Yep. Okay. So as I was saying, you can see some of the context of how the podium was formed. You can see the stepping nature of the site as it exists, the sort of white card models on either side here. And then the base of our building initially steps up from that. As a secondary move, the blue arrow is really on axis with Willard Court, and we push the building back here to create some open space off of West Randolph. You can see the open space of the City Winery. These two are not connected in the proposal, but there's a nice break as you walk along Randolph Street, and that's at the top of Willard Court here. Then as we go to sort of the next part of this, we extruded a form up, which is really the majority of the mass of the residential units, stretching up to 470 feet. It is a very tall and slender form, and it is notably pushed back from Randolph Street. And then into that form, we inserted what we're calling the jewel. So we have a sort of jewel and a framework piece here in orange in terms of the massing strategy, if you will. And those two pieces have a nicely sort of stepped profile that is responding to the vocabulary of the area. And it's sort of emphasizing the stepping back from Randolph Street in terms of how it works proportionally. We did make a model of the proposal here. You can see that open court that's in the base here. The sort of wood mass is fitting in contextually with some of the architectural vocabulary of the surrounding sites and materiality. And then you can see the crystal piece that's here is we're calling that the jewel, but it differentiates itself. So the building, you can see the two elements if we look at it here and how one is sort of hosted by the other. If I move off of that, we did take a look at the West Loop design guidelines. There's a number of things here that we feel that we are recognizing and being sensitive to. Some of the things I'd mentioned, the sort of taller, thinner tower. You'll see some of the access diagrams programmatically for everybody, just to go through one more time. City Winery in pink, parking podium is the sort of major element at the base. There's a notch where our first amenity deck happens, and then the residential units are from the top of that podium up to the top of the tower. And there's a number of other things that I know you're all very aware of what the guidelines are, but that we were trying to take into account. And this was included in the package that was sent over for review. We've placed the building into context. Again, I think the color coding people are aware of, but the yellow is proposed, green is approved, blue is under construction, and then our building is in pink color right now. So you can see the development that's happening locally. So this is kind of looking back towards the city. Here we are. This is our building again. If I just highlight it here, and you can see it sort of in the neighborhood of the buildings if we look down sort of towards the southwest. Looking basically due north at the evolution of the skyline in this area, you can see again our building in pink to the left here, and some of the proposed and under construction buildings, just to give you some aerial context for it. If we take a look at the building in its rendered form now, you can see, I hope you can see the elements that I talked about. So we'll talk a little bit about the base and the materiality of that base, but this is really our parking above our ground floor lobby and leasing center. You can see again that open space that's at the base of the building. Again, I can zoom in and I've got some bigger views of this as we go. But again, looking at the overall composition, you can see how the base then becomes the receiver into which we insert the jewel. This is looking back towards the northeast with some of the future context shown in gray. If we take a look now, I'm excuse me, standing looking up Willard Court, I can see really the two parts that make up the base of the building here. We have a terracotta framed element. This is perforated metal, which is folded and creased to give some activity and vitality to the base. This is still up at the top here where I'm moving my mouth. This is a folded metal plate that is, it's reminiscent of the perforated metal that's here, but just to be clear, that's still the parking garage that is behind that. The glass rail then is the beginning of the podium. And you can kind of see how these elements step in concert with the existing buildings in the area. We zoom the camera in a little bit. Now I'm looking at that open space. It's at the base of the building. You can see the white sculpture that is proposed here. I'm going to let Matt talk a little bit about some of the forms and the thinking for this space in greater detail. But you can see this is, I zoom in here, this is the main canopy entrance with the building identification. There's an arcade that goes and takes you into the main lobby here. This is also lobby function, and then our leasing and management office is pushed to the back of the courtyard here. It's a very tight site, as I think all of you can see and appreciate. This sort of brick that you see here is the existing brick wall of the City Winery. Pulling back a little bit, so now I'm seeing the corner of Racine, just as that's the curb line that you're seeing here. We're looking along West Randolph, and you can see the City Winery that's here. That is the City Winery's courtyard, and then our courtyard beside it. And you can again see the way the base sort of steps up in its proportioning. And then this is looking the other direction. So now I'm looking east. I can see the Alhambra building in its current form today, and you can see our proposal and how that sort of again relates to the context. If I look at the ground floor plan now, here's the City Winery site. This is their courtyard. Here's our courtyard and our main residential entry kind of in the middle of the site. This is a crosswalk that takes you across towards Willard Court. Similar to the previous proposal, there's a bump out that is proposed, which allows for some drop off. The rest of the parking existing today in front of City Winery and in front of Alhambra is nose in parking. Additionally, you can kind of see that our parking entrance is off of the alley in the back, as is the loading access. And bikes can either come in from the alley or they can come in through the lobby.
Hey, Chris, you have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, and that's good. I think this is Matt. This is where I hand off to you, and I'll keep paging through.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. I am Matt Strange. I'm with Confluence, the landscape architect on the project. So just to begin looking a bit at the site analysis for how we began to design the ground floor open space. This top image here is the view from Willard Court. As Chris mentioned, it's head-on parking currently and not the greatest terminus at the end of this right now. But we have this nice context of Randolph Street with these nice landscaped medians. There's street trees along Randolph, but a gap sort of where our site is currently. As mentioned, we have both City Winery on one side of our site as well as Alhambra Place on the other, so two busy, active restaurants. So we really wanted to take that into consideration, understanding that there's going to be people waiting for tables and reservations who might say wander into our space and want to have a few minutes to kind of sit down and congregate, as well as for just passersby along Randolph Street. So the way we developed this site plan here is we wanted to really create this immersive experience as people walk along Randolph, rather than thinking about this space as simply a little courtyard tucked within that rectangular envelope at the top of the page. We wanted to really think about how we could bring the sidewalk into that whole experience, so that you're not just walking by a courtyard, but you're actually walking through a garden. So the way that this works then is the head-in parking now becomes a parallel parking kind of drop-off zone along the front. And what we're beginning to do then is wrap the courtyard as well as the sidewalk itself in these undulating dunes that wrap around. So these are all covered in native planting and have a Corten steel edge around the base. And they have integral benches embedded into them, some multi-stem trees in the back in the courtyard space at the building, and then sort of an irregular placement of trees along Randolph, rather than kind of the typical 25 foot on center trees along the rest of Randolph, to really make the space a place for people to pause. As mentioned, we're proposing a sculpture element on axes with Willard Court there shown in pink, and a differentiation in the paving pattern wrapped around this space. The sculpture essentially sits on a slight plinth where you're stepping up 12 inches to get into that that upper courtyard space. There would be some movable seating as well as the fixed benches that are around there. And there's an accessible ramp that you'll see off to the right-hand side as well. And that way that you have this nice, slightly elevated perch along the sidewalk to just be able to watch passersby and be able to kind of congregate on those benches as well as walk through. So these images begin to convey the overall look and feel of the space. We're imagining a really kind of native natural landscape. We've got some upcoming slides here showing that in greater detail, but that all of these planting areas slightly berm up, as you might have seen in the renderings, so that as you're walking through, it's not just a flat plain, but the landscape begins to kind of rise up around you to give a greater sense of enclosure and surrounding. The native grasses would even rise up higher so that as you're walking through the space, it feels like this really lush, immersive experience. We have the built-in benches around the edge, which we're proposing as kind of a wood material with some lighting below. And then the sculpture is still very much to be determined, but something that creates an iconic focal point as you're looking down Willard Court and potentially kind of an Instagrammable moment in that space. Looking at the hardscape and lighting palette, as mentioned, we're imagining doing a Corten edge here around these dune spaces with doing a gravel area at the base of that to prevent any staining on the sidewalk. We think the Corten would tie in nicely with the terracotta within the building and bring some of that warmth and contrast to the planting areas. The paving in that upper portion of the plaza is imagined as kind of this pixelated pattern shown here, something just with a little bit of texture and relief from the sidewalk, and just really simple, subtle use of lighting, just simple uplights on the trees and a linear LED below the benches just to add a nice soft glow to the space.
You have about 5 minutes left.
Looking at the planting here, what we're proposing a primarily native plant palette here, composed mostly of street trees that are native, as well as the river birch shown back in the courtyard space. The planting is mostly ornamental grasses with some seasonal interest that kind of pops up through the grasses, as well as shrubs. The goal here is really to provide a lot of seasonal interest from early spring into the winter, so that we've got really an ever-changing seasons of interest as people are walking through the space and sitting within the space.
I might jump back here now, Matt. So just to finish off, I think people understand sort of it's a one-way traffic pattern in front of West Randolph here. You can see is indicated our main entry. As I said, the vehicular and the loading access is from the back. This is a decent width, the alley right now as you go through there, in fairly decent condition today in current state. This indicates bike routes. Of course, bikes can come in the front, as I said, or in from the back, and pedestrians, of course, the primary routes along Racine and along West Randolph. And you'll see there's our main entry into the residential lobby. The plans, as I said, it's a parking podium at the base of the building. As you go up through, you can see there's a level 6 is the amenity sitting on top of the garage. L-shaped floor plan above that steps back to a rectangular floor plan for the upper reaches of the building. In section, you can see the 4 levels of parking that are here. Blue are the amenities, yellow is the residential, and then mechanical at the top. And then included in the package was the elevations that gives the sense of materiality. So we're looking at the north elevation here, where you can see a mixture of glass and metal and terracotta panel system. These are better shown in the renderings, but they were included in the package. This is looking dead on at the south elevation. Here are the 2 side elevations, the west and the east. You can see the jewel sort of nestled into the base element. And then finally, there's included in the package with a close-up of the podium itself, where you can see the jewel element and the 2 differentiated pieces that comprise the podium itself, along with the city winery. And that's it. That is our presentation. So I could turn back to you, Josh.
Thanks, Chris. Committee members, please take a moment to review any comments received from the public in the Q&A box. I believe we have one, and incorporate them however you see fit. The floor is now yours for comments and questions to the applicant. For those who are remote, nope, that's it. Thanks. Yes, Phil.
Can we start to comment?
Yes,
Okay.
thanks.
Okay, I'm happy to begin. First of all, thank you for the presentation. Very clear graphics, very well organized. So thank you for that. And I think it's interesting. We've been all reviewing many projects in Fulton Market that seem to be in the 35 to 40 story range, a new generation of residential towers. And this one I think is it's very interesting. And I thought your first diagram, your slide 3, showing sort of framework and Joule, I thought was very interesting, especially that lower left-hand diagram. And I sort of wondered why, as you develop the building further, the base somehow became separated from the vertical component of the framework, and the base has an architecture, and then the two tower components have an architecture. You don't really read Joule and framework anymore in your elevation. It seems to me the Joule is very close to the vertical component of the framework, and then the base is extremely different and separated from the vertical part of what you called framework. So I was sort of curious about that, because I thought this diagram and your model were very clear, maybe clearer than the renderings. The second point I just wanted to bring up, and then I'll turn it over to other committee members, is I've got great concern about the street level, that the street level, your building really has one door into a lobby, and then there's also management offices. There's really nothing else for the community or for the street. And the plaza's raised above sidewalk level. It feels to be of a very different aesthetic and landscape. And I just would like to see something that reflects more of the Randolph Street character and the sort of food-driven characteristic of this street. And I think that this project should contribute to the sort of wonderful and fulfilling role that Randolph is emerging as a real community building place, with food as such a primary driver. And rather than just a recessed courtyard and management offices, I think you could rethink that so it has a much more dynamic contribution to the Randolph Street corridor. It could be actually rather deadly the way you have it today. It could be rather void of life.
And the applicant, you feel free to respond.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I wasn't sure if we were going to go through.
Yeah, I was waiting too.
Yeah, I might start with the differentiation, in the podium to the actual architecture of the tower. I think that the intention was really that these two would link together, but there is a differentiation, and there was a desire both within our team and within our discussions with the planning department to not carry that same skin exactly down into the podium. We did look at that at one point, but it felt like we've seen that before, and maybe it would be more innovative to have just a slightly richer but complementary texture to the base. If I can pull up one of these images here, perhaps. I apologize for the resolution, but certainly the vocabulary of the terracotta is continued down But then this gets a slightly richer pattern with the folded metal versus the glass of the apartments, which, you know, I take the comment that they are different. It's not as clear as the diagram perhaps, but I think as we had studied it, this is where we had landed. And I think there's room to study the jewel further to make sure that it's differentiated as clearly as it is in the diagrams right now. But we were looking at kind of a gridded frame of terracotta, and then to have a glass with a kind of you know, a waterfall pattern on it for the jewel itself. But that was some of the thinking that we certainly had looked at some of those things as we've gone through and asked ourselves the same question. So I appreciate that. That's something for us to think about.
And Phil, relative to your comment about the ground floor leasing management, this is a it's a mid-block site. It's a very tight site. We have to program it. There's nowhere to put any retail or anything in the building over here. The lobby is a very small area. The setback that we created over here with the open space was really keeping in tune with what was going on with prior, I think, approved plan with the hotel with the City Winery. And again, you have the City Winery and that retail feel and that outdoor space along Randolph at the corner. We're kind of mid-block, don't have room to put management leasing. We always are trying to put our management and leasing on the first floor because that's, from a functionality standpoint, it's best in our buildings. So there's really nowhere else to do it. And having it set back and creating, again, you know, let our Confluence get reaction to your question about the landscaping being elevated. We did all these things on purpose. We've been working with DPD to try to make it a little different and more creative and more exciting. And as Chris said earlier, we did have our original plans. We did come all the way down to the base with some of the design of the jewel, but you know, and going through this process with a lot of different people looking at it, you get a lot of different opinions, and you got to land somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. But I think we're all, you know, we're all in this together. This committee is really, I think, committed to trying to help the process and help the development be as best as it can be.
Mm-hmm.
And I just personally, I wonder if you're committed to the plaza, should it have a better relationship with that open space at City Winery? Should there be some dialogue or conversation between the two? Or should it be programmed more actively rather than passive with a sculpture? It feels like almost a downtown loop idea in a district that really is asking for something to be very different.
Well, the other issue relative to that is City Winery, when they do have events, have a lot of people out there. And we do have a residential environment here. And we really having people back into or come back into this plaza area. We're trying to keep it separate for a reason, but we're also trying to keep it open for a reason. So we're trying to solve both issues, which isn't easy, as best we can.
One additional thought on this, just to give some context in terms of what was done previously and sort of how we were thinking about it, is two thoughts. Taking Lee's point, that City Winery space is a ticketed, secure space, so you can't flow in and out from the public, and so they were concerned about that. And but still having a mid-block relief where it continues this open space, it maximizes and combines with their space to really create a mid-block void, you know, less activity. And normally I'm with you, Phil, that we want active street frontages. And in this particular location, some of the feedback from CDOT and the community was that it's almost too active. Between City Winery, Alhambra Palace, there's an adult store further, there's a lot of activity. And we were thinking the first time around, and Confluence took that thought further, is where do you go with your great sandwich that you might have picked up to eat in somewhere like a plaza without having to go to Bartlemy Park or Union Park? So this was sort of our thought, together with influenced by all these other factors, to try to create it a space where it can be active, but with outside influences, if you will. So just a thought.
I would reiterate what this is Joe McMillan from Azure in New York. Thank you, committee, for your time today. I would reiterate what Michael and Lee said. We thought of this as a respite for those who may be walking down Randolph, or to Michael said, a little Zen zone where they can go, they can sit. You don't have to be in the crazy of City Winery, the crazy of Alhambra, and we think it's something that in our experience is nice to have in developments, particularly when they're in a very busy place.
The frontage is 125 feet wide, just to put it in perspective.
This is Casey Jones. I am going to sort of reiterate some of Phil's comments. We are the Committee on Design, so obviously that's what we're going to focus on, and there may be differences about different kinds of design solutions being better than others. But as was stated, we're all in this for the greater good of the city. So I just want to point out that one of the nice things about the initial massing study and the models was that the jewel was the jewel because it had hierarchy in the composition. And when each of the elements is clad in a different exterior, one of the things you lose is that hierarchy. And so it becomes a collection of three equals as opposed to reading an object against a field. And sort of furthering that, I happen to think that the continuity between the base and the tower actually adds a lot of presence to the architecture and its place on the street. And so, I would argue for sort of a closer relationship between the two. One of the things is that the base is far more expressive and enthusiastic in its form than the rest of the tower, and so it sort of draws all of your attention to it. And I think that's a little unnecessary. This is a warehouse district that's being repurposed. It's not about creating super flashy kinds of expressions. And on the issue of the park, it's not, the blocks in the neighborhood are not so large that you actually need to take a rest mid-block. So while I support the idea of a park, I think it could be a nice break. It does sound like the genesis of it came from a different building typology, a hotel, where it might make sense to have a bit of a forecourt. And that if it's converting to a residential use, it might actually make more sense to have it come out to the perimeter. There's a fair amount of that facade, street facade that you characterize as active, but which I actually find to be very passive over most of the day, which is the City Winery facade. Those are not active bays. As you move down the street, it's just pretty much a solid glass wall, and there's only one real entry point. And then similarly on the other side, I think it's called the Alhambra, has only one point of entry. And so the composition of the street is not like a dense downtown location where you've got multiple storefronts with people entering and exiting over the course of the block. So I'll just leave it at that.
The applicant like to respond, or we could go to the next committee member.
Let's go to the next committee member.
Right. Juan, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you. Reyes, just compliments on the presentation, in particular, just walking us through your design process. Some of the things I'm going to share sound similar, but I think it's worth mentioning that, and I think it's poignant that we're still on this page, because I think we're all drawn to the conceptual process, and I think it's really strong. I also in particular like that you address the notion of the Willard terminus and that the building needs to speak to Willard. So I think there's something incredibly positive about that. And language of the base aside, the notion that there is a change in the base that acknowledges and marks the entry to the residence, I think that's really critical. So I wanted to commend you guys on that. I will say that I do think that it's lost its concept in the resolution. Not to get into all the points that have been raised before, I just want to underscore that I just agree with my fellow committeeman in that. And then the jewel, I love the notion of the jewel. Chris, I'm just a little worried that it has a language that's becoming familiar with some of your other projects, that the move of the vertical scores that move their way up the building, is there a language that can be more pure and more real jewel-like, is something that I think is worth exploring. So I know the other committee members have other things to share, but Chris, I think first and foremost, thanks for taking us through your design process.
Sure. No, I appreciated that. And thank you for the comments. That's good stuff for us to look at. Yeah.
Thank you. I think.
I'd like to respond, but I want to hear the other comments first, if that's okay.
Yep. Andre, I have you next.
Yes, and I think not to repeat too many things that have already been said before, but I do agree, with one of Juan's key points. I think there's a reason why we're kind of stuck on this page in particular. I think there's just such purity and simplicity in the diagram and your approach to how you're actually taking this building and how it was actually translated once you actually started to get into the architecture. It just felt like it was maybe a step or two too far, or one or two steps more than you probably needed to, where it actually started to erode a little bit from, at least what we're seeing in terms of, this concept of the interlocking massings. And then when you actually talk about the jewel, it just seemed to get a little lost. And if you were to go to page 12, I think it's slide 12, for me, this really kind of, frames up what maybe the issue is and some of the concern. There's just a lot going on here to the point where it's almost competing. Some of these moves that you created are almost competing with each other, whether it's the combination of materials, the folded metal panels, how that transitions from the base to the tower itself, and the open spaces. I think, if we, went back to that diagram, I think there's, some things that, it would be good if we could really capture back with just the simplicity of those moves and how that actually transitions to the architecture. But I do like the form itself, and I do like the simplicity of what you were trying to accomplish. I think it's just, maybe a step or two, one too many moves here that could probably be reduced to make it even more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the committee members, said everything that needed to be said, at least on the public plaza, the open space itself. And I'm sure Maria has a few comments that she'd like to add to that.
Okay, thank you.
Maria.
Thank you, for sure. Thank you, Andre. I thought the model looks great. Can we look at the model number 6? I thought the model starts like that, the continuity between the two public spaces, sort of open spaces, that can have a lot of potential, that has a lot of mass, critical mass there, that continuity, that fluidity, that's cool. So I would love to think about how can that then translate into the actual project. And I understand there is a different owner, different way of operating, the wall is there, but within all the constraints, what is the kind of next layer of meaning of transferring rights? Transferring rights, does it mean transferring all entirely responsibilities on the public space and at the ground, or can there be ways of collaborating that might provide the city with a different kind of more collective public space? I think that's what the question is in general in the Fulton Market District, and you have the opportunity here to really come up with a model that satisfies both entities, no? So if we can go back to the diagrams, that I agree with everybody else that the diagrams seem very promising. I will say the first one, the contextual envelope podium, those blue lines, you know, they get to a height, and I think that keeping that street wall reflected at the podium can be really important for the volume. And then maybe it's at that blue line level when the podium starts setting back and reflecting those movements and those proportions. So that some of the people you have up there in the roof looking down can be actually in a more closer, more fluid, dynamic relationship with the ground. That can be very interesting to explore. And then if you go to one of the renderings that shows the square, I totally agree with Casey. Keeping the pedestrian ground at level, especially such a small space, will feel more expansive, more accessible, more public, more inviting. And, you know, I love the idea of art in the public space, but since the space is so small, maybe there is a better way of thinking about the role of public art for this project, rather than creating another obstruction in the middle of a space that's so small. It just adds more complications to a project that is already has a lot of constraints. So perhaps, you know, if that leasing office becomes retail, this is more sort of a place of movement and transition, as Casey was saying as well. So in general, those are the ideas right there, but like thinking really about what kind of porosities and continuities can be created between the two public spaces that at the same time allow City Winery to continue to run their private spaces and gives your residents the sort of separation they need. What are the systems there, right? And we can all come up with 10 different options for it. So it will be great to have those conversations at the same table where you're talking about transferring air rights, maybe. Thank you.
All right. If the applicant team wants to respond, we have just under 15 minutes before we got to move on to the next project.
Okay. Let's talk about the open space first. And the comment about we don't really have any activation over there in retail. And again, we have to have management leasing on the first floor. We had original scheme, I believe, we had retail here. We didn't have the open space. And we would be happy to put retail here. And the issue with trying to be with City Winery, we have a wall that's blocking both of us. And we're not going to open up that wall. We got issues structurally, you know, even when we start taking down the existing structure. But my question is the desire, and we would love to put retail here, but, and it's a very tight site. So again, retail or open space. There's a lot of open space at City Winery there. We would love to fill this in with retail. And then we can keep our management leasing still where it is. We can create an active retail space, a couple thousand square feet, and that could solve that issue. Relative to the busyness of what's going on here is kind of, I'll use the word busyness. I see your point. And again, we did have prior schemes that we were working with everybody involved at DPD that were much less busy and much more where the jewel is the jewel, the base is the base. And I heard a comment, I think from Juan, that, you know, the jewel isn't really acting like a jewel. So going around and around, because again, this process with DPD, with the design, you know, this is our second community design that we've been through. You got a lot of different voices, and it's a really, really difficult role for the developer and the architect to listen to so many different voices when we're trying to do a project like this. If it was me, I would like to do retail there, and I would like to simplify the design. Chris, Bruce, want to comment?
This is Bruce Armstrong with Goddard and Company. Lee's explanation of the chronology is very accurate. The other thing from an efficiency point of view is we have solved our parking, but we're doing it with the handicap of that notch that you see open to the sky. If we fill the first floor in with retail, we would do the same above and create the base and make it far more efficient. And again, that changes the overall massing of the building. I think the comment about the jewel being diluted and losing its shine is very valid. But again, our prior directions were to dress up the bottom of the building. I think if we calm it down, the jewel will shine more. And but before we do that, I think we need to get to the final resolution of, are we going to have the recess and create the courtyard for the benefit of the pedestrian and how the context of the neighborhood feels, particularly as you're coming up Willard? Or do we bring the courtyard out to Randolph and lose the courtyard? I think that's the major element that we all have to agree on. And from there, I think we can address all of the architectural solid comments.
And as Bruce said, so the committee understands this, when we made this move to create the notch in the open space, it really blew our efficiency on our parking. Okay, because at some point you have to make a deal work financially as well. And you know, we sucked it in and we said, okay, let's do this. And our parking got terribly efficient and we were willing to live with it. I would love to do nothing but fill it back in and make the parking efficient and create a better environment down there. I just don't think we can create an environment that we're activating in connection with or in conjunction with City Winery. It's two separate entities. Anybody else?
Hi, Phil. I see your hand.
Well, this is Phil Enquist. I think this is a really healthy discussion, and I appreciate the openness of it. And I mean, personally, I'm not speaking for the committee, but I would definitely consider an option here where you remove the open space and you went back to a retail component at the sidewalk level, reinforcing Randolph Street, and looked at an alternative that did that. We didn't review any previous alternatives. We're not really reviewing any alternatives, but I think that the idea of replacing the recess with a food-oriented retail space at street level would definitely be worth pursuing, in my opinion.
Kind of agree.
I don't know how the rest of the committee feels.
I mean, I would second that, Phil. I think that you know, you're already on a boulevarded street, so you know, the introduction of additional park space, it's nice, but you know, this is a neighborhood that I think benefits from an active street edge. I want to comment on one thing, which is it's not quite a binary. You know, it's not a this or that option. I think that you know, if you had you modified the base in a way that was a little bit more in keeping perhaps with the original submission, I don't know what that was, it might have worked better. I mean, that's one of the things about design in general, as you know, is it's an iterative process. So, you know, my vote, again, independent of the committee, would be that you keep the street edge and that you animate the street frontage with retail, just as Phil recommended. I too see the logic in terms of it helping with your parking strategy. And I would just encourage you all to come up with some sort of resolution of the base that works with the rest of the tower and fulfills that original ambition of really keeping the jewel the jewel.
Casey, I think that's really well said. And Phil, I agree with you and Casey that in absence of having any connectivity with City Winery, there's going to be a barrier there. And I think rather than have a space that has a definitive barrier, it's better to activate it with other program and to pull it out to the street edge.
And Lee, if I'm hearing you correctly, if you were to pull that out to the street edge, it would allow you to have a more efficient floor plate for parking. Would that also mean that the base itself could possibly be lowered one level?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
If we could go to the other rendering, Chris, from
That
across.
mean on that one, if we can stay on that drawing, it might be surprising to the architects, but on this one, I
On this one?
agree. I agree that to have a small public space that doesn't really quite work, it might be more beneficial for the street to have a retail that works. There is a typology. I'm a New Yorker, so I'm very used to different architecture. In New York, we have what we call the arcades or the privately owned public spaces, and those include retail. Those are sort of permeable areas that you can enter, so especially in a city with winters like Chicago. So there is a world where you can have retail that has the feeling of being a winter garden. And I think that can be, that might be something to explore here. And if that allows you to bring the podium one level down, I think the street wall wins. So I think that's worth exploring.
Chris, do we have anything like we had, anything just to show what we did early on? Before we leave the last 5 minutes, I'd love to just hear.
I will say if you guys do that, then the green area on the sidewalk has to get a little bit cleaner, right? Because you need then that space for the pedestrians.
Again, our original concept was we were coming down, we were creating retail. There was a level less of parking. It was more efficient. The management leasing function was in the same place, and it's in the back. And you come into the building. We had a much cleaner to the left on this this image here. It was much cleaner versus because you don't have as much space to work with to the street. And that's what we wanted to do originally.
So you're saying we are saving you money and designing a better city.
What'd you say, Phil?
You're saying
you save money by coming here today.
Yeah, that's what we're hearing.
The base you could reduce the height of the base by 1 floor.
At least, yeah.
Could we look at the elevation, Chris?
Chris, can you find that or not?
I don't think I can find the old elevation.
I think that would.
The base would kind of come across this way,
But go to the, if you would, go to the north south elevation.
But I think we need to carefully study,
Well, I mean, you can kind of draw, what we had.
I think this would make a tremendous amount of sense to lower that height of the base, hold the street wall, recognize the uniqueness of Randolph Street. This isn't going anywhere. It's going on Randolph Street.
Right.
And you reinforce Randolph Street all the way to the west as a food destination. I just think this is really a logical adjustment to your current design. And I really appreciate your discussion with us about this.
Yes, thank you.
And Phil, the glassy element, which is the top level of the base right now, it goes away, and the jewel can come down and sit down and interlock. And then the confusion that you were noting, it's much more crisp.
Yeah.
It's much more in line with our wooden acrylic model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this vocabulary here would then start to inform, what's happening across here.
Right.
If we introduce the top level
go ahead.
We introduced the top level of the glass on the current podium. We did that because we thought if we brought the terracotta all the way to the top, it was too tall in its scale as it related to the adjacent buildings east and west. If we get rid of that, then the terracotta goes to where it wants to go. And it relates very well, in a scale wise. So I like this move. I'd be happy to get behind this redesign.
This is what we originally wanted to do. So yeah.
Okay. So we have about 1 minute left. Are there any other final comments before we move on to the next agenda item?
Yeah, what do we do?
I just
What do
wanted
we
to
do
say
now?
that
Michael, what the
how
heck
do
can
you
we do
save
now?
more money? No, I would say that retail there, while preserving some of the public quality of it. So I want to really encourage you to look at the covered plazas in New York as
The
a,
Winter Garden concept.
yeah.
Mhm.
And then we would just have to explain there's a West Loop design guideline theory of, public open space, but maybe the Winter Garden can be the explanation.
Well,
There you
again,
go.
don't get too married to a winter garden concept, because one of the things we're doing here is we're creating it's helping the design and it's helping the efficiency of the parking. And I think if we have retail there, that is the activation that, again, I know we got so many differing forces. We got the West Loop guidelines, we have DPT, we have Committee on Design. It's blowing my head. Okay. We never used to have all these things happening when we're doing our developments around town. So I'm really seriously asking, what is our next step? Because if we go back to what we kind of had and we present it to DPD and we present it to you guys again, I mean, is that what we have to do?
So the whole purpose of Committee on Design is to give DPD staff recommendations, which we will then put into a letter that we send to you.
Okay.
And then you will then create an updated package that you will send to us, and you'll note all the changes and why you could or could not, justify the changes. So those are the next steps. All right.
And Joseph, if that helps clarify, I think it's just not any kind of retail, right? I think we are talking about a retail that complements the food sort of nature of the neighborhood. Like,
Sure.
I'm thinking winter garden and coffee shop at the same time. So there is a world where you can achieve both.
Yeah.
A porous use, a cheaper building, and an active street. So I think that's the
I always like to say less expensive versus cheaper, Maria. Okay.
I know we're
My dad taught me that a long time ago.
Yeah.
I know we're trying to end this call, this part of the agenda, but I do have one comment on this. I think it would be great if you could actually explore ways to punch through that wall. You may not be able to borrow that adjacent space. I mean, in an ideal world, it'd be great if you could actually have some type of deal that you can work out with the winery, depending on what that ground floor use wants to be. If it's a restaurant, you could have a shared space, but I know that's probably a step too far. But at least, the idea of making some kind of transparency, if you are building up to that wall, maybe finding a way to punch through it. So you could at least, visually feel like, that building is actually engaging that space in some way architecturally, if not physically.
Well, that takes into account another entity, which is the owner of the city winery, if they want to even do that.
Yeah, but we can ask.
We can ask. We have a good relationship. We can ask. I guess so next steps, it's very clear based upon what Josh said, that we'll get a letter and kind of summarizing what we've talked about here today. When can we expect that? So we know we're under tight timing here. I'm not sure how long that'll take.
We generally aim to get that back to you within a week.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for
very.
Thank you. I know we went
All right.
over our time. Sorry, Josh.
You're fine.
Everybody's comments.
Thanks,
Thanks,
John.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Yes.
Thank you, Butler.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope you found it helpful.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.
All right. So we will now move on to the second item on the agenda. I'll just go over a brief summary. If the applicant team wants to go ahead and pull it up and make sure you can share your screen and have your audio working. The Discovery Partners Institute, a University of Illinois system-led research and innovation center, will occupy a 1-acre site along the South Branch in the 78. With more than 200,000 square feet of space, the academic and research center will house classrooms, meeting and event spaces, and labs and offices for research, development, and startups. Project design is underway and groundbreaking is anticipated in 2024. With its multi-directional form, the Innovation Center is intended to engage communities on all sides, toward the nearby riverfront and toward the future phases of the larger innovation district at the 78. Multiple public infrastructure improvements, including the construction of the Wells-Wentworth Connector, Metro track realignment, and a new Red Line subway station at 15th Street will facilitate the redevelopment. To any committee members who are associated with this project, if you have not yet, please recuse yourself at this time and for the duration of the review for this project. To the applicant team, please clearly state your name and your relation to the project prior to speaking. You have 20 minutes to present your proposal. Committee members, please hold your comments and questions until after each presentation. Other than that, you may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the committee members for your time this afternoon. My name is Kumar Kintala. I'm with the Discovery Partners Institute. I'm the Innovation Hub Director there. I'm excited to share our design with you today, as presented by Christy Cheng from OMA. Just as a quick introduction, Discovery Partners Institute does three things. We do tech talent development, providing people pathways to work in the technology sector. We do applied research and development, growing on the University of Illinois' already very large base of research, and we incubate new startups coming out of the university. We will be developing this project on the 78, and we are part of the University of Illinois system with funding from the state of Illinois. So I'd like to introduce two colleagues that will then pass it on to OMA, our design architect for the project.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ebony White. I'm from the University of Illinois system. And as Kumar mentioned, the project is being, it's a system project as DPI is part of the system. Emily, if you'd like to go next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Zgoninin. I'm project manager with Capital Development Board, State of Illinois. And we are a state agency that we are overseeing construction projects with the state and federal funding. So we are overseeing a DPI project, and it is funded by the state.
Great, thank you so much. Excuse me. So I'm going to be sharing presentation duties today. I'm Christy Cheng, as Kumar mentioned, from OMA. I'm one of the associates leading this project. I'll be sharing presentation duties with my colleague, Amy Rowbottom at Jacobs, and they're our architect of record. So actually for these first initial slides, I'm going to turn things over to Amy.
Thank you. Christy mentioned, my name is Amy Rowbottom. I'm the project manager for Jacobs. And here before you is a site context map of the 78 entire development that Related Midwest is owning. The north arrow will depict that we are looking to the left to the city, that direction. Our site in bright yellow is a 1 acre parcel that anchors the southern end of the 78 development. You can see some of the proposed infrastructure elements for metro realignment that would cut through the eastern half of the site, Clark Street immediately following, along with some of the tertiary roads of LaSalle Street, and then a future connection with 15th into Clark and a CTA station and ferry stop running east-west. Next slide. Here are some of the site context photos that are there. The Wells-Wentworth streets are actually in place right now and will lead north-south, anchoring the city core to Pingtom Park on the south end. Our site was actually at the corner of Wells and 15th, which is that second image there. And then across the river, you can see the St. Charles Airline Bridge, along with some of the city views in the photos that you see there. I did want to mention too that there is going to be an active link into the neighborhoods that you can see kind of on the bottom images there, Clark Street on the west end. As for reference, we are in the Plan Development Unit number 1434, which is the entire 78, and more specifically, our parcel is in sub-area 2 with the FAR ratios listed there. And we are in conformance with those development guidelines. Here's just a few highlights of the FAR ratios in terms of our parking requirements, bicycle spaces, loading, height, etc. So we are not asking for any exceptions specifically on these things. One of the key items that we want to point out is the design guidelines of the Plan Development Unit. We are activating a lot of elements that you can see here, accessible and welcoming, and we are creating an iconic piece of architecture that is of the place for the 78 and the surrounding communities. And to that end, we are of the community. We have lots of components that we've reached out to the local surroundings. They are excited not only about what this building can do, but also the programming that DPI will be bringing to the community. So I'm going to turn it back over to Christy to share a little bit more about how the facility and the programs are going to be represented in the architecture.
Great, thank you, Amy. I should also mention that my colleague Caroline Corbett is also on the line from OMA, so during the Q&A portion, you might see her pop up. So I'd like to get a little bit more into the programming in particular and how we use the program to really drive the design. So within the new DPI headquarters, we have really a diverse program mix, programs including classrooms, experimental labs, computational labs, offices. And really the way that we saw how these different programs and those diverse users could interact was through collaboration space. Of course, one of the unique things about this headquarters is the fact you'll be bringing together such a variety of different types of people, from students to Nobel Prize winners, researchers, and teachers. And so we wanted to ensure that the building provided as many spaces as possible for those collaborations to happen. So what we did was took each of the programs that essentially need to be enclosed, our offices, classrooms, experimental labs, and computational labs, and stacked them into efficient volumes for all of the MEP servicing needs. And then we enclose those program volumes within a unified building form. And the way that this building form was really derived was driven by a desire to address the unique multi-directionality of the site. We wanted to ensure we weren't privileging any one direction so that we had the same frontage to views of downtown, to the river, also to the near east side and south to Chinatown, so that the building really was as democratic as possible in its overall form. We like to think that within the building then we have essentially a petri dish of different programs or cultures where unique, new, different things will be really discovered in the interaction of these different programs. The programmatic volumes are organized into what we like to call neighborhoods within the building and on each typical floor. So at the northern end of our typical floors, we have our computational labs and offices that define a computational innovation neighborhood. More towards the center, we have our instructional neighborhood that are anchored by our classroom spaces. And then towards the south, our experimental labs and workstations that define a different type of innovation neighborhood. Here you can see an overall axon in which all of those different programs are organized. So computational labs, classrooms, and then experimental labs. I did also want to touch on the site access for our particular building. As Emmy mentioned, we are just 1 acre of the larger 78 master plan. So future planned infrastructure moves such as that future Red Line station or ferry stop are really part of the larger 78 master plan, and not in the scope of this particular project, but of course we're working extremely closely with Related Midwest in order to ensure that all of those infrastructure pieces are in place to ensure the success of our building. So just to summarize, really the overall guiding design principles for us were to ensure this multi-directional form, to have this democratic presence to all directions, and also in order to support all of the different programs of the DPI, which really serve students, teachers, community members, to ensure that the ground floor was as welcoming and porous as possible. And I'll get into a little bit more detail on the ground floor design. We also wanted to ensure that all the programs were really maximized in efficiency, hence why we organized them essentially into these programmatic volumes. But then also we were increasing the amount of spaces where collaborations could happen. So we have a central atrium that I'll also show an image of that we refer to as our active collision zone. That's part of a larger network of flexible collaborative spaces that are really interspersed throughout the building. In the design of the facade, we also wanted to ensure that we are addressing the site conditions. So you'll note, and probably saw in the documents already, that we widened the solid panels or the metal panel facade towards the south and the west in order to minimize solar exposure and ensure that we're providing appropriate daylighting conditions. So here, just zooming in a little bit more, you can see some of the other planned 78 improvements. So although we are on our 1 acre parcel and somewhat constrained by our site, we'll also be flanked by larger river walk, river promenade, landscape, moves that are being planned as part of the larger master plan, and also towards the north, a larger central park that's also planned as part of the 78. As part of the design process, we also visited and researched a number of different precedents, both for program mixes, but also in the way that these buildings related to innovation campuses. So projects like the IIT Innovation Center or the Siebel Center for Design were particularly useful for us to consider how we could increase the amount of areas for flexible collaboration, while examples like the Tata Innovation Center were helpful for us to consider how the DPI will start to relate to future planned buildings that will be part of the innovation campus on the 78. Then here you can see massing from a few different orientations. And I think from these views, you can really understand how we meant to have this very democratic experience of the overall building form, addressing the multi-directionality of the site. And here a view looking north towards downtown, where you can also start to see a little bit more clearly how the DPI building will relate to the larger 78 master plan. As part of the CDB process, but also just the natural evolution of design, we also looked at a number of different design options. This is just a very small selection of how we might consider how to organize the programs and how the building form and the facade might vary. So you can see from earlier iterations, we were looking at more of a stepped or a staggered program organization, or even different facade studies where you've been looking at a very different type of facade to the more option 3, which we had developed from our schematic design submission to CDB, which has been the option that we've continued to evolve. We also looked at shadow study of our building so that we could understand the impact onto future developments. Not unsurprisingly, of course, we have the most shadow onto the east and northern sections of the site. And then here you can see a rendering. This is our entry view from the north. So this would be coming from that river walk or river promenade. And then zooming in a little bit more, you can see a view of our entry. And I think here you can also clearly understand how we really mean for this ground floor and this entry to be as open as porous as possible. You can already see into the base of the central atrium that we have. The space will be activated as well by programs like a cafe, which you can see spill out of here as well. We want to ensure that this ground floor really invites building users and passersby into the building. So then here on the ground floor plan, we've placed not only that cafe, but also a few different types of multi-purpose rooms that can be used for a variety of different flexible uses, such as events that might need to be held by DPI or classrooms, but also could potentially be held for community meetings. We also have a 100-person auditorium and overall a flexible open floor plan that can facilitate exhibitions or also larger events like career fairs, which in our conversations with both the university and community, we understand there's a great demand for. Given we are on a 1-acre site, we do have limited site area to consider open space and landscaping, but we've had some really great conversations with Commissioner Cox. So you might note that this dashed line is our actual property boundary, but we have started to extend the design of our site and landscape all the way to 15th Street. And this was based on a conversation we had with Commissioner Cox to ensure that we are providing ample, generous pedestrian entries and public plazas. I'll also note, it might look small, but our Northwest Plaza is approximately 2,500 square feet. So it's also not so dissimilar to entry plazas downtown, like the one at 111 South Wacker. And our Northeast Plaza is about 1,600 square feet. And integrated within our overall site landscape, there'll also be seating opportunities, also ability for some of those interior programs like the cafe to spill out with flexible furniture.
Hi, you have about 10 minutes left. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Here you can see a north-south section cutting through the building with really that interaction between our central atrium space and the programmatic volumes flanking. And then here the east-west section, you can see how our cores, that atrium space, and then our classroom volume also interact with each other. And then here, a clearer rendering view of the central atrium. So as I mentioned, we really consider this as our active collision zone. So we have floating meeting rooms that are integrated within the space, and also various connecting stairways that will connect the different floors. But the central atrium is also just part of a larger network of circulation and interaction zones throughout the building, which also includes perimeter stairs and flexible workspaces, study spaces that are located along the perimeter of the building. And this way we started to define more active versus more quiet zones, and also really wanted to increase the amount of interfaces in which we could have these different collaborations. So here you can see a view of the perimeter circulation with some of those more quieter study spaces, as I mentioned. In this cut through axon, you can also see a little bit more clearly how the central atrium here really interacts with those perimeter circulation spaces and how they connect to the different program volumes and start to define this larger network throughout the building. This is the north-south section, then cut a little bit further west. So here it's kind of cut through our more typical program volumes, but you can see that diversity of different program types on any typical floor, which you can see on this floor plan as well. So with the stacking of programs, each typical floor then has a mixture of these different program types that will really encourage interactions between user groups. In a way, coming together to find a larger DPI network, not dissimilar to a computer chip. So I just wanted to touch briefly a little bit more on the specific types of labs and spaces we have in this building. We have computational labs that are used for more computing software development purposes. And then we also have dry experimental labs or engineering labs, if you will. This is a view of our typical computational lab. And here you can see also how that space will interact with the perimeter circulation and those flexible work study spaces located along the perimeter. And then here a view looking from the center space into one of our experimental labs. We also have planned on the 6th floor a large event space that's approximately 3,200 square feet that'll also be able to be used for a variety of different types of events. And here a view of that 6th floor event space. So our 6th floor is our last occupiable floor, the top 2 floors of our building being primarily mechanical. The facade will be comprised of a combination of metal panel and insulated glass, which you can see a little bit more clearly in this cut through section. So here you can see also, this is more typical of our southern facade, where the metal panel becomes a little bit thicker in order to minimize solar exposure. We're still investigating exactly what type of metal will be in the metal panel, but we're looking at anodized aluminum or potentially stainless steel. And at the mechanical floor, something more similar to a perforated metal panel or louver system. So I mentioned that our metal panels become thickened towards the south and the west, and this is a direct reaction to the solar radiation that we have particularly strong from the south and the west facades. And previously, before we had added in the shading, you can see how the interior daylighting conditions were a bit too extreme, but that after adding in this integrated and sun shading, overall illumination levels and also overall energy performance is vastly improved. And I'll just run quickly through our different building elevations. I think here you can also start to get a sense of how that metal panel changes and thickens towards the south side. So this is our west elevation facing towards the river, north elevation facing towards downtown, east facing towards the rest of the 78 and future innovation campus, and then south. So also note that we are on target to achieve LEED Gold with a number of different sustainability measures that are integrated into the design of the building. Not only that we are as part of the 78, of course, the redevelopment of a brownfield site, but also a high performance envelope with some of these integrated shading that I already mentioned. We're also utilizing native and adaptive landscaping throughout our site and also utilizing as much recycled content materials, materials that have low embodied carbon as much as possible. So now I'll just end with this final view. So this will be our view from the future Riverwalk. Thank you.
Thank you. So committee members, please take a moment to review any comments received from the public in the Q&A box and incorporate them however you see fit. The floor is now yours for comments and questions to the applicant. Please raise your Zoom hand and we will call on you. And it looks like Juan, you're first.
I can't believe I beat Phil. That's a first. Okay, Mr. Enquist.
You go Juan.
I just thank you to the entire DPI team for sharing this with us. We know you're not required to, but to open it up for us because it's such a critical project to our city. So just first and foremost, thanks on behalf of all of us. I've been following this as a Chicagoan from the moment you won the competition, and kudos. I'm really curious what transpired from the design at the competition to today. So just as we get through this, I would love to just hear that. That's more of a fly on the wall, you know, just to hear what transpired. And I absolutely appreciate the democratic space comment, the notion that, you know, this is a project for all. That being said, it's also such a unique part of our city. You know, you're at the border of Chinatown to the south. To the west, you have a Latino community in Pilsen. To your north, you have the skyline, you've got the river. There's so many contextual elements that seem to be, and I'm glad you addressed the solar impact on the south, so that already that started to create some different shaping moments. But I just feel like there's some things that are potentially missed that could have been informed by this relationship to all these unique parts of our city. So with that, I'll hand it back over to you. Those are my immediate comments. Thanks again for bringing it to us.
Thanks. And then the applicant, you can respond after each person unless you want to just hold off until you hear other committee members.
I mean, I'll just say we would be very happy to explain the process from competition to now to you. I'm sure all of the architects on the call would be very fascinated by the process and also fairly familiar with the process. I think point very well taken about the fact that we are facing such a diverse context. I think for us, you know, the approach was to really, you know, as I mentioned, be as democratic, but I think it is a very, you know, it's a very fair point that a different design direction could have been to maybe try to directly address and represent that in a more diverse, let's say, building facade from the different orientations.
Chrissy, if I could just add on to what you said, you know, the metal panels towards the south end are thickened, but the views from inside the building towards the south, the east, the west, at the south end of the building should be quite, you know, extensive. We have floor to ceiling glass and tall ceilings, so I'm hopeful that people can enjoy outward, you know, outlooks from that part of the building just as much as they can from the north side. You know, part of the competition transition process did involve obviously a right sizing of the budget to the square footage. So there was a significant downsizing as a result of that.
All right, thanks. Phil?
Oh, thank you. I can't believe Juan got there first, but thank God he did. You know, I just want to commend you all. I think it's a beautiful project, and it's attempting to be a real landmark on the south side of the city, a landmark for this emerging district that's being developed, and it's really a gateway into Pingtom Park and the south branch of the river. It's got so much going for it. So I want to commend you on this effort to really define a landmark building. And I also am intrigued with this idea of the democratic response to all directions. And I think that's a great response, but in reality, it isn't the same in all directions. And your eastern facade is only going to be experienced by the buildings right immediately adjacent. Very few people will see the east facade. The west facade is the river. The south facade, and I wish you would think about drawing this in your next round, draw what this building will look like from being in Pingtom Park, because it will have I think, quite a strong view while you're in Pingtom Park. So it creates a gateway to the 78 as well as a gateway to Pingtom Park. But this container with the collision space, it's all very interesting. But if you could go to one of your plans, like go to a floor plan of the street level, it just, think about these as comments. I know you've got your core to the back, to the west, which is reflecting the fact that there aren't many views from that side. You have an entry on the corner. You have your cafe facing 15th Street. You sort of wonder why that wouldn't maybe face the river and Wells Street. But what I do find curious is spaces like the auditorium, which would be enclosed, I'm guessing, or the multi-purpose room, seem to be barriers between the street, the river, the street, and your collision space. And you'd like your collision space to somehow be more visible on that western facade in some way. And I recognize it's a lab building, and to make a lab building this beautiful is a real challenge. But that collision space, I think, should somehow be visible from Wells and the river, taking advantage of the view of the St. Charles Airline bridges and the river activity and the future of this river walk. It just seems to me that that public space in the building needs to open out in some way, not to be fully contained. But that's really the only question I have to you. I think it's a very compelling form. It could be knocked around so it isn't so symmetrical. But I recognize the constraints of a lab building, and I just encourage you to keep going with this, because I think it's really a very exciting project for the city. So thank you.
Thank you. I think many of your comments actually echo some of the comments that we received in earlier meetings we've had with DPD, with Cindy and John, and certainly with Commissioner Cox. So some of the modifications that we've made, but I completely agree with you. I think this is an area we continue to study, actually, the ground floor in particular, where that we tried to really open up this collision space ground floor much more towards the north. Previously, we had another volume here, where now we're planning to relocate probably the kiosk over to one side to ensure that this is as connected as possible to 15th Street. I think it's a very fair point that we should be looking at, really how to create that visibility and connection also to Wells Wentworth just as much. So this is an area that we continue to study. So I think it's a very good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks, Christy. And Phil, great perspective. We definitely struggle with that discussion. Part of this struggle is that there's no mid-block crossing on Wells. And so, the only crossing over to the river is at 15. So we were trying to strengthen that as the legible entrance to the building, but we also obviously we don't want to create a mega block dead wall condition on Wells either. So Christy also has some ideas around how to make that auditorium potentially transparent to the outside. And so we have some ideas that we're working on there as well.
Mm-hmm. Can you lift the auditorium up to the second level?
So we actually have a grade change and we move from north to south. So actually our auditorium stage level is currently sunken 4 feet from where the grade is at this particular point.
Oh.
And so for us, we think that actually creates a pretty interesting sort of visual connection to the seating and also out to Wells Wentworth and to the river.
All right, thank you. Are there any other committee members that have any comments or questions for the applicant team? All right. To the applicant team, do you have any other last comments or anything you'd like to say?
Can I just ask one other question? I just wondered if there's an energy strategy in the design. Is there some kind of renewable energy idea or a energy efficiency strategy that you didn't cover or you're thinking about?
I mean, I'll say that we do have some budgetary constraints. So we, are looking at including as many renewable energy sort of methods as we can. But right now it's a fairly typical energy system or a mechanical system, but we're looking to try to optimize energy performance as much as possible.
Okay.
Keep going. Yeah, just keep going.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just maybe finish up by saying we really appreciate the opportunity to present to the committee. Really value the feedback. I think it echoes a lot of the things that we've been looking at and sort of struggling with as well. So thank you.
Okay, all right. I guess with that said, before we adjourn, on behalf of DPD, thank you again for all of your critical thinking and thoughtful comments on these two important projects. The meeting will now come to a close. So thank you all for attending and sharing your thoughts. We hope you'll come back soon.
Thanks all.